I once had a young woman with red hair come here for surgery absolutely terrified because of a genetic report she was carrying telling her that she was resistant to anesthetics and she was afraid that she would wake up in the middle of surgery. She was so anxious that she used a bunch of her friend's anti-anxiety medications just to make it through the door. Worse yet, as if that wasn't dangerous enough, her genetics also told her that she was 18 years older than her actual age, and she'd put on a pound of makeup because she was so self-conscious about how she looked. This is the world that we're living in now, with mass-marketed DNA tests telling people how they're going to respond to life or death medications like anesthesia, and how fast their body is aging. But can your genetics actually predict if you're going to wake up in surgery? How about your hair color or your race? And how accurately can they measure how fast your body is aging? Or are these tests just expensive guesses sold by companies in a $7 billion direct-to-consumer genetics industry? Waking up in surgery is really rare, like 0.1 to 0.2% of all surgeries. Unfortunately, when we're panicking here in the moment, those numbers aren't very reassuring. So can we use your DNA or hair color or race to help better optimize your anesthesia to minimize that risk of waking up? It turns out we might be able to. For example, there are some important genes in your body that encode key detoxification enzymes called CYPs or CYPs. They're literally responsible for detoxifying substances and medications in your body. And some people have gene mutations that mess with the function of these key detox enzymes, like this one called CYP2D6. This CYP enzyme can impact how well pain medications work or don't work for you after surgery. Mutations in this gene impact how slowly or quickly your body chews through pain medications, which can make the effects of these medications stronger or weaker. This enzyme is particularly important because it can also lead to overdoses in patients who metabolize these pain medications differently than others. And it's one of the main reasons we try to limit our use of codeine, because it's impacted by this enzyme and there can be so many mutations in the population which can adversely affect our patients and even their children if they're breastfeeding. Another example is in some genes that are more common in some races than others, like CYP3A5. Which is seen preferentially in African Americans and can absolutely impact drug metabolism. Another scary sounding gene is BCHE, which is important for breaking down a particular anesthetic medication called succinylcholine, which is a paralyzing medication. We need to use paralyzing medications in anesthesia so that your body can tolerate the surgery and so that we can place the breathing tube to support your breathing when you're asleep. Patients who can't break down that succinylcholine molecule fast enough, like those with BCHE mutations, are at risk of remaining paralyzed longer than the duration of the anesthesia medication itself. And that means that they're at risk of waking up but still being paralyzed and being locked in. Your anesthesiologist doctor is supposed to time the medication so the anesthesia and the paralysis wear off at the same time. But in patients who have this gene mutation, the paralyzing medication might stay active for much longer. Fortunately, this mutation is very rare and I've only seen it once in a patient in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, there's no antidote. You have to put the patient back to sleep and mechanically ventilate them until that medication naturally wears off. And then there are other genes out there that influence how much anesthesia you need to stay asleep, especially for medications like propofol or the milk of amnesia. Patients with the 5-HT2A gene mutation need 20% less propofol to fall asleep, and they fall asleep 40% faster. And there are many more genes out there that can influence your susceptibility to propofol, meaning that you might need lower doses to stay asleep, or put another way, that you're at higher risk of overdose from that same dose of propofol. I know the sound of overdosing sounds really scary, but I'll tell you at the end why it's actually quite safe when you're monitored by a doctor having surgery. Some of these genes that influence our sensitivity to anesthetics also cluster in certain ethnic groups, like how European Jewish ethnic groups might be 20% more sensitive to anesthesia gases than Caucasian Jewish ethnic groups. And then there's the question of redheads. And there are so many articles all over the internet, so many patients always ask me, do patients with red hair actually need more anesthesia? That is indeed the observation, but it's not the case for all anesthesia medications. It appears to be more more impactful for anesthesia gases than for the liquid anesthesia. And we don't know why redheads appear to have increased resistance to certain anesthesia medications. It's probably related to the gene that's responsible for their red hair called melanocortin-1. But why that gene for red hair impacts anesthesia response, we don't know. And the effect isn't always small. It might be in the double-digit percentage range, maybe around 10-20%. The problem is that there's lots of variability in the studies, so we need to ultimately titrate anesthesia to effect regardless of your hair color. After hearing about all those genes that can influence your body's response to anesthesia, would you believe that most anesthesiologists don't even look at these genetic reports, even if the patient is waving them in their face with stacks of paper here before they come into the operating room? It's because anesthesiologists titrate their medication to effect. This means that during surgery, we're delivering the dose by carefully watching its effect on your body and giving more or less as needed based on your heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rate, and many other factors. If it's light sedation, I'm also going to use the verbal feedback of my patient to make sure that they're safe and comfortable. Now, I love genetic reports. I order them for my patients all the time. But in the context of anesthesia, your genes only play a small role in how your body holistically responds to the stress of surgery and the anesthesia medications. And there are loads of layers between what your genes predict and how your body actually behaves in response to anesthesia. Believe it or not, your risk of waking up in surgery is usually better predicted by your age, your mental health, your specific type of surgery, any recreational drug use, your heart health, liver and kidney function, the medications you take, and your anxiety before you fall asleep. For example, the risk of waking up is higher in children. This study cites 8 to 10 times more frequent, though personally in my practice, I don't see it quite that much higher than baseline. Also, the risk of waking up is higher in certain surgeries like C-sections, emergency trauma surgeries, surgeries at night, or in open heart surgery. The risk may also be higher in patients who are overweight or obese, though this is controversial. Part of this is because of differences in heart and lung health in those patients, and part of it is also because weight-based dosing is different because of the difference between ideal body weight and actual body weight in these patients. And that can lead to some uncertainty in which body weight to use when dosing weight-based medications. Patients who have a history of chronic pain, substance use, or heart problems are also at higher risk of waking up. And that's because of increased anesthesia requirements in patients who have abused similar substances or medications in the past, or in patients with chronic pain who need to take pain medications to keep their pain at bay and therefore are more resistant to those same pain medications when used for surgery. In patients with heart health, the concern is that we might need to use lower doses of anesthesia so that we don't overwhelm the heart's ability to handle the anesthesia. And the lower the dose of anesthesia, the higher the risk of potentially remembering something. And that's why we ask you so many questions before you fall asleep for surgery, so that we can best integrate your whole picture and come up with an individualized anesthesia plan for you to keep you safe and comfortable. And that's why you should be very honest with your doctors before going to sleep for surgery, especially around potentially touchy subjects like substance use, especially cannabis use, because the effect of chronic cannabis use on your brain can wash out the effect of red hair in terms of your resistance to anesthesia. Some studies suggest the requirements for propofol might be twice as high in chronic cannabis users. So that explains my patient's genetics report and their red hair, but what about their accelerated aging that was causing them all this anxiety, for which they put on all that makeup before surgery, which you should never do? We'll talk about biological age measurements from your DNA in just a second, but just a quick reminder that if you're learning something new, please share what you learned with your loved ones, and let me know in the comments below if you've ever heard about people waking up in surgery, maybe from red hair or maybe from something else. And if you want to learn more about how your genetics influence your well-being, you can always visit my longevity clinic's website here in San Francisco at www.claris-health.com. So your genes can make predictions about how you respond to anesthesia, but can they predict how long you're going to live? My patient was having serious anxiety before her surgery because no one explained the limitations of the test for her biological age. And I believe that increased anxiety increased your anesthesia requirements and the side effects associated with those higher anesthesia doses. So you see, our DNA changes as we age, and we can use those changes to predict how fast our DNA is aging. If your DNA age is older than what your birthday suggests, that might be a problem, because maybe your body is aging faster from some unknown disease. We use a technique to measure your biological age called methylation clocks. Methylation is the name of a special process where a specific molecule called a methyl group gets slapped onto your DNA at a specific site. And the number of these methyl groups that piggyback onto your DNA at certain sites correlates with your age. This is called epigenetics, coming from the Greek word epi, meaning on top of. So these methylation changes are considered epigenetic because you're not born with them. They impact your genes over time, especially through your lifestyle. Now, these tests haven't always been very accurate, but over the last 10 years, they've become much better at predicting how long you're gonna live, like whether you'll reach 100 years or not. Like this graph, where methylation patterns at a much younger age predicted how long they're gonna live. On top of that, your DNA also reflects some very interesting insights, like your income level, where the higher your income, the younger your DNA age based on these methylation patterns. And your race, because for a given age, African Americans appear to have an older DNA than their non-Hispanic white counterparts. You can also see the impact of cigarette smoking on your organs based on these methylation patterns, and even the risk of dementia, like Alzheimer's type, based on these patterns. And unsurprisingly, what you eat and how you exercise also impacts your methylation patterns, where more exercise and better diets correlate with younger DNA age. Even your immune system can impact your methylation patterns, where the activity of your immune system appears to impact your DNA. The big question I work on with my patients in my longevity clinic is if and how we can safely slow down that clock so that we can live longer with better health. But what about my patient before surgery? Was she actually 18 years older than what her birthday said? I don't believe so, because these tests are not perfect. And no one had actually explained the limitations of her report to her, which was based on an outdated calibration method, and I believe caused her unnecessary anxiety. So even though genetics is a booming business and lots of labs are trying to sell you their tests, you should always work with an expert in interpreting the results. Some genetic results can be life-changing, like in some of my patients who can change their medications, or their supplements, or their nutrition to feel better and live longer. But not all tests are made equal, and bad results sure can cause a lot of grief and anxiety and be a giant waste of money. So please share what you've learned with your loved ones and hit that like button and subscribe to keep up with all of my medical content. And be sure to visit my website to learn more at claris-health.com, because I believe that you have more power over your health than you've probably ever been told.